Hello, everyone. It's Nick from A Longer Life here. And today I'm really excited to chat about brain sensing technologies with Ariel Garten, who's the founder and CEO, meaning Chief Evangelism Officer at Muse, who have, of course, been producing the Muse Brain Sensing Headband for quite a number of years now. And excitingly, they've released a version of this headband most recently that can do some sleep tracking, the Muse S. And we're going to chat about that, talk about sleep tracking. Ariel, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nick. It's a joy and a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to chat about sleep, but I know it's evening time for you, so we forgive you if this discussion makes you yawn at all. Yeah, we're just saying ahead of time. You feel free. It's late. We're talking about sleep. We're priming for some good sleep.
Hopefully everybody listening to this who's not driving will get nice and sleepy.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Listen to it before bed.
There you go. We'll put that sleep track in the Muse app. So thank you. We're really interested to talk about how brain sensing can link up with sleep tracking, because the Muse headband, I mentioned to you when we were having a chat before this interview started that I had one of the original Muse headbands and practiced the meditation with it. And I've done meditation for the better part of 20 years now. And I love that biofeedback process that I got to dip my toes into the water with that headband. And now that technology has advanced a lot. So the new headband, particularly this Muse S, which I have with me and I'll most certainly be putting on in the interviews. This is soft. The sensors are soft. Fits on your head. You can almost forget it's there. And this means that it can be worn at nighttime now. And this sleep tracking feature, and it makes it a sleep tracking wearable. Can you introduce us to just the very basics about how this little headband can track our sleep?
Sure. So this is Muse S. It is the brain sensing headband that helps your brain health, and it does, as you mentioned, several things. One is it helps the meditation, and the other is it helps you sleep. So some of you are familiar with the idea of having a home sleep test. You might have had one for sleep apnea, or you might have gone into a research lab and had been covered with sensors to try to discover what your sleep problems were. In a research lab, they're putting EEG and EMG sensors on your body, the same things that we have put into this device here. So Muse has 4 EEG electrodes, 2 in your forehead and 2 behind the ears, to actually track your brain while you sleep. It also has a PPG sensor to track your heart, an accelerometer to track your movement, like your in-lab sleep test would have. So tracking your heart, your muscles, your movement, and your brain. Now, if you've ever gone to a sleep lab, you know it's a pretty unpleasant experience. And we sought to change all of that by making a slim, comfy little thing that you can wear in your own bed and get PSG, polysomnography, sleep lab quality data. And it does that by tracking your brain as it shifts from wakefulness into sleep and tracking the changes in brain activity that you get throughout the course of the night. Now, some of you might know about like an Oura ring or other ways to track your sleep. If you're using your finger or your wrist to look at your HRV or your movement, all of those are not really tracking your sleep. They're just tracking proxies of your sleep. Only EEG can truly track your sleep in exquisite and beautiful detail.
Awesome. And you've introduced a few really important terms there that I wanted to go through right up front, because we're talking about sleep tracking, certain metrics of sleep quantification, other related terms. Let's just steer right around back to some of the basics. And the first one you mentioned was EEG, right? Mm-hmm. So tell us first what that stands for and why it's important for sleep tracking.
Sure. EEG stands for electroencephalogram. And what it's doing is it's tracking the electrical activity of your head. So if you go into a sleep lab, they're going to put little sensors on your forehead, on the top of your head, maybe behind your ears, and these are to track your brain activity during the transition between waking and sleep. And as you transition from wakefulness into sleep, you have some very characteristic shifts in your EEG. So one is as you close your eyes, you have a phenomenon called the alpha block that increases your alpha brainwave activity. And then as you move from wakefulness in, quiet resting with your eyes closed into true sleep, you're going to see the drop out of that alpha, and you're going to see a dramatic increase in your delta waves. It's the slowest wave sleep. When you move into REM sleep, you're going to see a different change, and you're going to see significant eye movements. So there's the REM saccades that happen. And then so throughout the night, you go through all sorts of different stages of sleep, and we can talk all about it. And as you move into a sleep stage called N2, you end up seeing sleep spindles, which are another characteristic brainwave feature, which is 12 to 15 hertz spikes that happen that are actually really important for memory consolidation.
Wow.
So
okay. So you're getting into the details of what's happening in the brain, which in contrast to measuring sleep at the finger or on the wrist, like my Garmin watch claims that it can do, you are instead measuring sleep at the source with these brain waves. And I believe this actually relates back to a term that's also used on the website and in sleep tracking called a hypnogram. Could you just tell us what a hypnogram is and how it relates to what you were just describing?
Sure. So hypnogram sounds like a super cool term. So as you move from wakefulness to sleep through N1, you actually go through the hypnagogic state, where it's like when you're falling asleep and stuff starts to get kind of psychedelic in your brain, and there's weird floaty images. But if somebody wakes you up at the moment, you're like, oh, no, I wasn't sleeping at all. Well, when you moved into that state, the hypnagogic state, you've moved into N1 sleep. And with EEG, you can actually track very precisely the changes from state to state. So wake into N1, the first state, hypnagogia, down into N2, which is when you're moving into light sleep. Although it's a great sleep stage, it's called light sleep. And that's where you have the sleep spindles that help you consolidate your memory. Then you move into deep sleep, where you end up deep in delta. And then you move into REM sleep, and you move through these phases throughout the night. And a hypnogram is basically the little tracking of your states throughout the night. So you might see that it starts in wakefulness, you're dropping down into N1 very briefly. N1's a quick state. Down into N2, then you hang back into deep sleep, up to REM, and you're going to see these little patterns of moving from state to state. And that overall night sleep is represented in a hypnogram.
Right. And actually, hypnograms are available in the Muse app, that we can see our own hypnogram as we wear this device. I've been wearing it for the last 2 weeks to track my own sleep. I do have to say at the beginning, you mentioned it's comfortable and soft. It's very, very comfortable, very soft. I like it. And we also mentioned another term that's related to hypnograms, EEG, and that's polysomnography, which is the gold standard or sleep tracking lab standard for doing sleep analysis. And I wondered if you could just introduce that again, and then just explain to us why. It was one of your marketing claims, actually, that you make on the website, which is, we're starting to understand why you can make that claim, is that the Muse S can operate like a sleep lab at home.
Polysomnography, or PSG, has a few words in it. Poly, meaning many. Somno, meaning sleep, somnambulating, walking in your sleep. And then graphy, just like geography, all of the graphies. So it's a system of knowledge or a categorization of that knowledge. So polysomnography is when we're basically recording and categorizing your sleep in multiple dimensions. When you go into a sleep lab, they are looking at your EEG, and then they're also looking at the movement of your muscles, and the movement of your body, and the movement of your respiration. It turns out that the Muse device can actually do those things and do it from the surface of the head. It doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of a full sleep lab, but it gives you sufficient data to actually give you the same sleep staging information that you would get in a sleep lab. So in a sleep lab, they record your EEG brainwaves, and then a technician, a real human, looks at your EEG data and stages it and scores it and creates that hypnogram from basically hand staging it. which is very labor intensive. What we're able to do with Muse is build a automated algorithm that looks at your sleep data and is able to score your sleep as effectively as a technician would. So there's a metric in sleep studies, which is called the Cohen's kappa, and the Cohen's kappa is the amount of agreement that any two experts would have when going through and staging the same sleep data. And our Cohen's kappa is 0.76, which is actually better than expert level, which is 0.75. So we do a better job of being able to classify your sleep using this automated AI-based method than even an expert would hand scoring that data.
Right. Okay. So that's a pretty convincing piece of evidence to back up your claim of it being effectively a sleep lab at home. And you have mentioned a few times, and I think it'd be useful to explain just one further time, the connection between the brain waves that this EEG sensing headband, this brain sensing headband picks up when you're sleeping, and the stages of sleep that are being scored by these experts that your device can do with equivalent or if not slightly better accuracy.
Sure. So sleeping is a phenomenal experience that goes on in our brain that has a whole host of benefits for your mind and body. And it is a time when your brain is working in a beautiful orchestration. So you think about an orchestra, and if the trumpets are playing one piece really quickly, and then the timpani's doing something else, and then the cellos are going super slow, it may not all sound great together. And during the day, the different areas of our brain are constantly working. And so our brain waves, when you look at spectrograph, when you look at the basic distribution of your brain waves, you're going to see an experience that's kind of all over the place. You're going to see high beta when you're thinking. You're going to see different parts of your brain having different brainwave amplitudes at different times and brainwave frequencies. So it's kind of not chaotic, but it's very busy. When we go into sleep, our brain kind of moves into a concert where everyone starts to play the same note. So imagine, the orchestra, some's playing the beta waves, the alpha waves, the theta waves, different parts are playing different things. As you move into sleep, all of that starts to come into one symphony. And it begins with the closing of your eyes. When you close your eyes, you see an increase in alpha brainwave frequency. So beta brainwave frequency is a fast frequency when you're aware, you're alert, you're cogitating. Alpha is a slower frequency associated with relaxation and internal focused attention. Close your eyes, all of a sudden the whole brain starts to kind of coalesce into one rhythm. As you then move deeper into sleep, you drop into delta. So the marker of movement into N2 sleep is the beginning of these sleep spindles that I described. And that's a very collected, orchestrated spiking activity, which is bringing your brain's network online and activating it in a particular way that we think is associated with memory processing and consolidation. And then when you drop down into deep sleep, stage N3, you've moved into deep delta wave activity. So delta is really, really slow. It's like a slow drumbeat pulse. It's like 1 to 4 hertz, really, really just slow beat. And it's believed that sort of synchrony that happens where your whole brain is pulsing to the same slow beat allows for the transition of information across networks so that disparate parts of the brain can communicate together in a way that doesn't happen during the day. And that's also considered to be a part of the knowledge consolidation during the day. When we then move into REM sleep, the brain takes on a characteristic that is much more like the waking brain. In fact, it can be hard to differentiate a waking brain from a REM brain, except that our bodies don't move. It's a phenomenon called catatonia, where we're not moving when we sleep, thank God. But our eyes are flashing back and forth. That's why it's called REM, rapid eye movement. And that allows for a different kind of processing. It's when we typically experience ourselves as having dreams. And there, the idea is that we are pulling up pockets of information from our past experiences and kind of reorganizing them with the new information that you've taken in during the day. And it's another part that's responsible both for memory consolidation and processing as well as emotional processing. And some scientists even think it's a part of forgetting. So during the day, we have the important act of remembering things, and then there's other things you want to forget, like you don't want to remember where you parked yesterday because you're going to mix it up with where you parked in the parking lot today. So, there's an active process of curating our memory. And then we go back to waking in the morning and the beautiful, the somewhat more chaotic symphony that occurs in our brains.
Beautiful answer. And it is a bit of a wonderful symphony when you describe it the way you have, because each position of those waves in terms of their frequency distribution is changing intentionally in a way that's meant to provide different levels of restoration and processing for our brain and our overall health and feeling and sense of well-being. And in fact, one of the things I noticed that was fascinating from my perspective in terms of an advantage to the Muse S sleep tracking was the ability to calculate restoration points based on slow wave intensity. So you have this concept in your app of being able to effectively quantify and add up all of that slow wave activity that's happened, which is in a way equivalent to the amount of restorative sleep we've got overnight. Can you tell us just a little bit about how that math stacks up and why the feeling of being restored or refreshed overnight is related to the total amount of slow wave intensity and slow wave sleep frequencies like you just described, for example, the alpha and the delta waves?
Sure. So in deep sleep, which most of us have heard about, you want to get lots of deep sleep. So deep sleep tends to happen primarily at the beginning of the night, and you ideally want a good quarter of your night's sleep to be deep sleep. And you may have heard that many of us don't get sufficient amounts of deep sleep. So we may be sleeping for 6, 7, 8 hours, but of that amount of time, we're not getting our requisite 2+ hours of deep sleep. And deep sleep is the most restorative sleep in the body and the brain. And as I described that, delta wave symphony that happens where everything's pulsing at once, that's deep sleep. And there are a number of theories of why deep sleep is so restorative. One is that deep sleep triggers the movements of glymph throughout the brain. And glymph is it's kind of like the plumbing. So you might know about lymph in the body that moves fluids throughout. Glymph is the plumbing of the brain, the fluid systems, and it actually allows the pulsing and movement of toxins out through the brain. I know toxins can be a very silly term, but it's been demonstrated that beta amyloid, which is one of the precursors potentially of Alzheimer's disease, has been shown to actually move through and out the brain during deep sleep. So deep sleep is incredibly important and restorative, but many things disrupt our deep sleep. Some is, our disposition as a sleeper. As you age, the amount of deep sleep you get naturally decreases and your deep sleep becomes shallower. And many medications and caffeine can also disrupt deep sleep. So although you're sleeping, you may not be getting the restorative sleep you need. What we do in our deep sleep calculation is we look not only at the amount of time that you're in deep sleep, but actually at the depth of the delta, the amplitude of the delta, the amount of delta that you're getting in that deep sleep. So, and during that N2 stage. So what we're actually seeing is not just how much deep sleep you have, which is an important metric, but actually the depth of that deep sleep to be able to indicate how restorative it might be. And that also allows you to really analyze the things that you're doing in your life that might change and thereby improve not just the amount, but the depth of your deep sleep.
Very important, and particularly to our audience who are very interested in trying out things. We call it self-experimenting. Being able to see, for example, which sleep supplements might be helping me, which forms of magnesium help me sleep better at night, is one very simple example. And we're able to do that remarkably effectively with basic sleep tracking of just even keeping a sleep journal. We can already start to dig into that enough to make some good decisions for ourselves. But when it comes to getting even more detailed in understanding what's really restoring us while we're sleeping that we're not consciously able to be aware of or track in a simple way, this slow wave intensity feature, these restoration points, I think, in the Muse S headband, and the app sound really promising for some sleep self-experimentation. And in fact, it lines up with one of the other marketing claims that I wanted to check in with you, where on your websites, you mentioned how while other sleep tracking devices can count minutes you spend in light, deep, and REM sleep, the Muse S can uncover the when and the how of sleep. So when your deep sleep is the most restorative, even what sleep position is keeping you asleep versus waking you up. And so can we talk first a little bit about what it means to be able to understand the when and how of sleep?
Sure. So backing up for a second. So if you're tracking on the wrist, you're simply looking at the movement of the body. It's called actigraphy, and it used to be the gold standard for monitoring sleep until they had much better ways. And so you're really just hoping that you get a sense of your body is still, your body is moving, and these kinds of movements and these sorts of heart rates are generally associated with this kind of sleep. So it's not very precise. When we go to actually look at EEG, you can really start to think about, like, moment by moment how your sleep is going. You have a graph that really shows you your total sleep time, the time you had in bed, which positions you were lying in, what your heart rate was doing. So there's a lot of really detailed information that help you unpack the course of your night, and see, okay, how long did it take me to get into deep sleep? If my room is darker as I go to bed, does that allow me to get into these states more readily? If I, change what I do before bed, if I stop drinking this liquid prior to bed, how does that change my experience throughout the course of the night? So, this kind of like detailed, time-based, depth-based, and brain and body-based information allow you to come up with some really interesting and meaningful insights into your own sleep.
And one of those that seems to be a differentiator is sleep position. And I've not had any insights into my sleep position before. Now, wearing the Muse S headband for the last 2 weeks, I've started to see that I prefer sleeping on my right side by about 55 to 60% of the night. Then it's a bit on my back, or mostly then on my left side. So what does this sleep position tracking start to enable for the Muse S users in terms of understanding their sleep?
So it's very easy to look at the correlation between different positions that you're in and how often you roll around, move around, and how those movements then play out in relation to your sleep stages. So I, for example, fall asleep facing one direction because my husband is on the other side of me and he is snoring. And he has the very bad habit of looking at his phone and watching videos before he falls asleep. He's right there. So, my sleep position is actually very much associated with the kind of sleep that I get, based on the experience that I'm having from him. So, that was totally insightful. And I start my night sleep on one side away from him. I move towards the other side. That's when I end up actually getting into deeper sleep, probably once he's asleep too. And then you can see how I shift throughout the night, and how there are impacts in my sleep. So it's been totally fascinating. And it also has led me to reconsider my pillow choice. So side sleepers should typically have a pillow that fills up the space between your shoulder, the base of your arm, and your neck, so that your neck is fully supported throughout the night. Whereas somebody who sleeps on their back probably wants a much thinner pillow. So if you think you're a back sleeper, but actually you see you're spending much of your night on your side, you actually might want to go and reconsider your pillow choice based on your sleep position.
I think that's a winner right there, even in just determining where you're spending most of your sleep at night in terms of your sleep position. Are you on your back? Are you on your side? How is that correlating with, for example, stillness and the restorative sleep periods? That's an level of insight that I didn't expect when I first picked up the Muse S headband that I'm really very grateful for. And I think you've made a really interesting point there just about pillow choice. I mean, that's a very practical example of how using Muse S sleep tracking can improve our sleep.
And if you're somebody who snores, you might recognize that you or your partner is affected by your sleep position. So some people have much better experiences when they're on their side versus when they're on their back, particularly if they have apnea. So, this question of sleep position and how it relates to your quality of sleep and how you feel the next day can actually be quite impactful.
Okay, well, just digging deeper into the insights here that this Muse S headband can offer us in terms of sleep tracking, there was a common objection that you alluded to earlier about finger-based and wrist-based sleep trackers. And that is that the user can be still and tracked as being asleep, but know that they're awake. They could be reading a book. They could be laying there spinning out about what's happening tomorrow, some other thing that might have happened to them during the day, or just not being able to sleep. And these wrist and finger-based trackers miss that and misassign it legitimately to being a period of sleep. Now, I think I know what you're going to say, but the question is, can the Muse S finally tell the difference?
You froze, so I heard can finally tell the difference and then nothing.
Let's do that again, all right? Let me ask that question again. One of the marketing claims on the website, I like this one, is that other devices might take periods of stillness or a calm heart rate and interpret them as sleep. Maybe you're engrossed in a late night novel, motionless, and your wrist or finger-based tracker says you're asleep. However, you were awake. I know I've experienced this with my Oura Ring, for example. My partner has the same complaint. Our question here is, can the Muse S finally tell the difference in between laying motionless and being awake and, in fact, being asleep?
Yes, it can. And that comes back down to brainwaves. So when you're laying with your eyes closed, the EEG characteristic of laying down with your eyes closed versus actually being asleep is incredibly different. So although physiologically it may not look different at other points in your body, like on your wrist or on your finger, in the brain, we can tell immediately when you've moved from wakefulness into sleep. And in fact, we actually have a feature called the digital sleeping pill that is so precise, it is able to not just know, but anticipate as you're moving from wakefulness into N1 stage 1 sleep, and then adjust the audio content to help you fall asleep faster. So it is incredibly precise at identifying those shifts and changes in consciousness.
Well, we wanted to ask you about this because it's a really interesting term. And at surface level, it sounds like it's just some fancy marketing, digital sleeping pill. I have not tried this yet. I most certainly am going to. But tell us a little bit more about a digital sleeping pill.
Sure. So, we all know that wouldn't you just wish that you could pop a pill and fall asleep? We also know that that's probably not a great thing to do unless it's magnesium and it's probably benign or possibly helpful. But, most other sleeping aids are not helpful in the long run and probably are disruptive to our sleep stages and our sense of wakefulness the following day. In the digital sleeping pill, what we're doing is we are tracking your brain activity and giving you real-time feedback on your brain activity that actually encourages your brain to fall asleep. So how it works is you choose a piece of audio to listen to, and it could be a bedtime story, guided meditation, soundscape. We have all sorts of different content. And listening to that takes your mind out of your wandering, anxious mind that might be keeping you from sleeping and anchors you on the content you're listening to. Now, in the same way that when you're a kid, you might have had a kind adult tell you a bedtime story, and that kind adult is watching you as you're falling asleep and making their voice really sleepy. And then as they see your eyes are fluttering closed, they slow down. And when you're finally asleep, they shut off. Mm-hmm. So too can the digital sleeping pill do that. Muse is tracking your transition from wakefulness into sleep and actually adjusting the audio that you're listening to in order to give your brain the cues that, hey, it's okay to fall asleep now. So as you move from wakefulness into stage N1, it lowers the volume, it adjusts the content, and if you fall asleep, it then turns it off. And if you haven't quite made it into N1 and you pop back up again, it brings the same audio back in and takes you back down gently again. And it's super effective. People who have difficulty sleeping swear by it, love it. And if you continue to wear the Muse throughout the night, if you wake up again in the middle of the night and have difficulty falling back asleep, the Muse automatically brings back in that same story or experience that helped you fall asleep the first time, because that experience has now been conditioned by your brain as a sleep cue. And so it's both effective at helping you fall asleep at the beginning of the night and helping you fall back asleep if you wake up in the night.
All right, that was a beautiful explanation. I really like the audio example of slowing down, getting calmer. Many of us have had that experience if we're fortunate enough to have those loving present parents or grandparents or caretakers to read us a story and calm us down at night. And to be able to be offered that in a biofeedback way through this headband is pretty cool. So I'll be sure to try that out and let the audience know what I think. But you've sold me on it. I'm probably gonna try it tonight. Watch out.
Awesome.
Let's nerd out a little bit on accuracy before we wrap up the interview. Readers want to know this. We've got a lot of readers who are biohackers. They're into their data and they're searching for things on the internet like how accurate is the Muse sleep tracking, or more generally, what is the most accurate sleep tracking wearable? And, as scientists, I think we immediately recognize, particularly through this discussion we've just had, that precision is actually might be far more important than accuracy in terms of what sleep stage are we in. We'll set that aside and assume that people want, when they look for accuracy, just to know which wearable is doing it the best, in a very simple way of saying it, right? There's been some science on this published by your team. For example, your science team, and you may have been a part of this, I don't remember the authorship on the conference paper, had a 2023 conference paper showing a high accuracy of 86.3% when estimating NREM and REM sleep. Just tell us a little bit about quantifying the accuracy of the Muse S device and what those two terms, NREM and REM, mean.
Sure. So NREM is non-REM, anything other than REM. And REM is rapid eye movement, that experience that you have when you're dreaming. And remember, I said it's very difficult to classify REM from wake because the brain looks essentially the same. It's just the body's not moving. So we have an 86% accuracy at classifying REM, which is incredibly high, much higher than anything else out there on the consumer market. And in fact, this wasn't us that validated it. So the Canadian Sleep Consortium uses Muse across quite a number of their studies. And so they have actually taken on the mantle of doing all of the validation of Muse. So they have run over 100 nights of co-captured Muse and proper PSG data, looking at the two side by side. And they have looked at the data that their PSG would give you. So PSG says you're in these states versus what Muse says. And they are the ones that came up with the assessment of the accuracy of Muse. And it's actually so accurate that there are over 50 sleep studies by institutions like Stanford, Harvard, etc. Mayo Clinic does a ton of work with Muse. And so all of these scientists have trusted and understand and seen the validation that Muse is so accurate as a polysomnography system that they can actually employ it for their scientific studies to be able to baseline and ground truth sleep data.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty strong credentials to talk about 50 different studies. I personally, when I was looking in the science, didn't see all those published yet. So could you tell me a bit more about, are some of those ongoing? When would we hear results from those types of studies? Or are they things that are happening in clinics where there's not publications? Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So Muse has been in market as an EEG device actually for a decade. So we first came out in 2014. And we are both used widely by consumers to learn to meditate and now sleep, as well as by scientists. So there are over 200 published studies using Muse. So that means literally thousands of researchers use Muse for their research. Some of them use it for EEG research, both in lab and out of the lab. Some of them use it for meditation research to actually be able to implement a meditation protocol inside of a study. And some of them use it for sleep research. The pure sleep research is the newest kind of research that we have. We developed Muse S, and then Muse S was taken up and validated by the research community. So most of those studies have just begun. But if you go to our website, choosemuse.com, and you look under research, you can see some of the many studies that have already been published. And those range from, so I mentioned Mayo Clinic. So Mayo Clinic did their initial study with Muse in 2015, they started it. And they used Muse meditation for breast cancer patients awaiting surgery, and demonstrated that by meditating with Muse and using neurofeedback, they were able to improve the cancer care process by decreasing their stress and fatigue and improving their quality of life. Since then, Mayo has embarked in probably 7 other studies with Muse in a broad range of different conditions. One that is more recently published is on Cushing's syndrome. That there was a conference paper that came out demonstrating it improves symptoms in that stress-related illness. Mayo Clinic even did a study with their own doctors using Muse. So during the pandemic, they had 50 of their healthcare professionals using Muse, both its meditation and sleep intervention capabilities, like the digital sleeping pill. And the doctors had a 54% decrease in burnout while working in the ER during the pandemic, and also improvements in resilience, cognitive function, and sleep. So, there's been a ton of published studies with Muse, and many more that will be coming out over the following years, including one from Mayo Clinic on long COVID. So they had long COVID patients using Muse, and I've seen the data because we're now doing a partner study with them for the next phase of the project. But the data is going to come to publication very shortly, and it is highly positive, so much so that using Muse is one of their main recommendations, like core recommendations in their long COVID protocol.
All right. Well, there's some encouraging things happening there, and in particular, helping people with their quality of life, which is that's why we're here at A Longer Life, honestly, is to help people in particular avoid the diseases of aging and reduce human suffering in that way, by empowering people with information about their health and to leverage technologies that can help them be healthier. So let's take a forward-looking view here with EEG technology, wearable headband from Muse. Where will this go in the future over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of continuing to improve human health? Is there another headband that you need to build to take on another problem, or is it integrating it with other technologies so that it becomes more effective? Tell us in brief, your vision.
Sure. So 5 to 10 years is a long time out. I don't actually need to go that far. So the existing device that we have, the Muse S, really does, so many things that we want it to do, and it's really become a core tool for brain health. So, we've talked a lot about meditation and sleep, but one of the additional features that it has is the ability to actually track ERPs, event-related potentials, and those are markers of cognitive function. And we've come out with other markers like alpha peak frequency, which is another marker of cognitive function. We wrote a paper with our group looking at brain age metrics across both meditation and sleep, and we identified novel metrics of brain aging. So, all of this leads us in the direction of being able to have an increased number of insights about the brain and increased personalization of those insights. So being able to have a device like Muse, use it every day as an intervention and or therapeutic, like we currently can with meditation to help you strengthen your brain and improve your cognitive function, decrease your stress, and all the benefits of meditation, to use it to track your sleep and as a sleep intervention. And then from there, be able to actually get actionable insights on your brain and your brain's function as informed by all of the insights and studies that we've done with, awesome researchers at top tier universities. So that's actually all kind of already happening. So as we look out 4 or 5 years, 10 years in the future, what I see is a, continued honing of that ability to deliver self-knowledge, and brain health insights, as well as tracking and recommendations and interventions to help you improve your brain health and cognitive function and mental health.
Mental health. So I'm going to briefly put this on, ask you a bit about what you just said on brain age. The audience is going to be very interested in that. Where are we in terms of being able to quantify our brain age wearing this device and potentially improve our brain age to be younger, for example?
Awesome. So many things to say on that. So the study that I was referring to, it is called Try This at Home. It was a cheeky title, published in a great journal. And what we did is we looked at samples of brain data of people meditating and people during sleep and correlated with their age. And what we identified was a novel marker actually in the N2 and the sleep spindles that correlated age with brain activity, your biological age. We found a marker both in daytime as well as in night, but actually the marker in sleep was stronger and better correlated than the daytime marker. So predictor, we could actually predict people's age based on this marker. And one of the interesting things is that the daytime marker, which is related to your alpha peak frequency, that daytime marker is something that you can actually shift and change with meditation and neurofeedback practices. And when we look at the brain aging, brain health longevity research, there's a ton of research that demonstrates that actually simply meditating is a really valuable way to improve your brain health and your cognitive aging. So there's a very great study from Dr. Eileen Luters, and she looked at MRI images of meditators and non-meditators, and long-term meditators. And she classified people who were long-term meditators as those who had meditated for 5 years or more. And in the long-term meditators, she was able to see anatomical differences in their brain, like increased volume in the prefrontal cortex, increased volume in the hippocampus, that made those long-term meditators, made their brains look on average 7.5 years younger than non-meditators of the same age. So the simple act of meditating and maintaining that practice is actually able to strengthen and shift the characteristics of your brain such that it looks like a much younger brain. So when we talk about, what should we do for our brain aging? The basics are eat, exercise, sleep well, and meditate.
That's a great list. I'm really glad we could touch on that topic before we close off, where I like to ask every single one of our interviewees to share with us a little bit about their own longevity strategy. To just name 2 to 3 things you're doing every day, every week, every month, whatever you'd like, to look after your own long-term health.
There are so many of them. Okay, so the basics, of course, are exercise and eating. So reducing sugar, eating natural whole foods, etc. That should be obvious. Sleep for me is incredibly important, and I'm highly protective of my sleep. I try to get 8 hours every night. I'm consistent in the time that I go to bed. I meditate, use my Muse on nights when I know that I might be waking up and going back to sleep if my kid has a cold, for example. And then I'm going to put a point back on meditation, which is a consistent and regular meditation practice, and one that allows me to really effectively manage my stress and give me a sense of loving connection, both with myself and with my family and the world around me. So those are just some of the, to me, basics and non-negotiables of how you manage yourself to live a longer life.
Key message. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really insightful. You know so much about sleep and how we can track it using the Muse S headband. I'm just getting started on that journey. I'm going to go try some digital sleeping pills and let the audience know how they work. Thanks once again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.